All right, settle down, class, settle down. Welcome, everyone, to FHIST 1000, an introduction to fictional histories. My name is Professor Streiser, and I will be your teacher for this class. Now, a lot of you might be thinking, why fictional histories? Isn't the real world interesting enough to be learning about its history instead? And I raise you this in return. Why not? Sure, there are tons of people that will teach you about things that actually happen, but I think you might agree with me that the stories we tell each other are equally as interesting. Since we were first able to hold a coherent thought, our species has been telling stories to each other and making up worlds that sometimes mirror our own. Like any other fictional studies class, we'll be studying those stories in order to hopefully get a greater appreciation of them as creative works. So with that out of the way, we're going to skip over the syllabus today because honestly, you'll all probably fall asleep during that part anyways. Now, today's lesson is about a very popular online game, one that I'm sure you've heard of at least once in your life if you were online in the late 2000s or 2010s. It's one of the biggest kids games on the web and is still around today with hundreds of thousands of players. That's right. Today we'll be talking about Neopets, but not just Neopets as a whole. Our first unit of lessons will all be about the many countries of Neopets. Each lesson will be specifically about one of the 18 to 19 countries in Neopia, so I expect you to pay attention as there will be material that will connect between lectures. Before we go any further, can you raise your hand if you've ever actually played Neopets? Anyone here today? Okay. Now how many of you have ever played this game on the site? Cast Basher, the one where you whack a little purple bird doll as far as you can with sticks and bats? I'm a bit of a fan of it myself. Did any of you know that the little bird doll you're hitting is supposed to represent the leader of an enemy kingdom from a historic war? It's true, and today we're going to talk about him, as well as his kingdom. But to do so, first we have to talk about another related kingdom. Today we'll be talking about Meridell, Darigan Citadel, and some of Neopia's biggest wars. Now let's start off simple. Meridell is a country in Neopia based off of medieval England, with castles, knights, and lots of agriculture. Their colors are red and blue with an accent of gold, and the land is ruled over by King Skarl. King Skarl has been in power for as long as we have history about Meridell, so it's safe to say that those of his species tend to live a long time. Much of the kingdom is made up of farmland, with dozens of small farms working together under the name Merry Acres Farm. Players can visit it to pick their own vegetables, count potatoes, and defend crops from plant-eating slorgs. Together, these farms provide at least half of all food for the kingdom's inhabitants. In the kingdom's main area, players can find activities that you might find at a Ren Fair or harvest festival, like cheese rolling, archery, and, of course, poker. According to lore sites like Jellyneo, the land was first discovered by players in Year 4, on the 30th day of swimming, which, if you didn't know already, Neopets has its own calendar, so that would translate to July 30th, 2002. The land also is home to Ilizin, the Earth Fairy, who lives in her own little glade and gives quests to players. We'll be talking more about the fairies and their own little country in a later lecture. But, as you may ask, how did this old-fashioned kingdom come to be? Well, Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was Meridell. According to the lore of the game, the kingdom has existed for many years before being discovered by players, but the first notable event we know about is the famine that took place around 300 BN. Though we're not exactly sure the precise year, since it took place so long ago and most people who were there aren't around anymore, we know that around this time, the kingdom of Meridell was hit with a devastating famine. For a land known for its farming, this was no doubt a difficult time for the citizens of Meridell, who, as stated previously, relied on the crops for a majority of their diet. After all, without their famous potatoes, what would they be left to count? Extremely. So, King Skarl, who was still alive at the time, sent out his strongest knights to figure out a solution. The knights brought back a magic orb, and with that orb, good times and prosperity returned to Meridell. The famine disappeared, and any diseases that were plaguing the citizens of Meridell were magically cured. All in all, it seems like this was the start of a great era for the kingdom. But as we know from real-world history, fancy artifacts don't just come from nowhere. See, What the people of Meridell didn't know was that the magic orb that healed their crops was stolen from a neighboring kingdom, which was happy and peaceful until then. This kingdom is the infamous Darigan Citadel, which was a pretty normal place when they had the orb. But once it was taken, it was transformed to its current state. Its citizens were cursed, turning shades of purple and black with glowing red eyes and sharp teeth. It warped their minds and made them more aggressive. The land became infertile, and the entire kingdom was soon transformed into something that was almost unrecognizable for what it once was, a floating fortress of darkness. Even the kingdom's ruler, a Corbat named Lord Darigan, was transformed by the curse and swore vengeance on the knights who'd stole from him. He spent years searching for them, and according to Neopian scholars, fell under the influence of 3 mysterious ghosts that drove him to ambition, greed, and vicious revenge. It's at this point that we begin what is known as the Champions of Meridell plot, a site-wide story event that players can participate in from July 23, 2002 to April 28, 2002. While the historical events of Meridell and Darigan have been a bit spotty so far, from this point forward we have excellent documentation of what happened, thanks to some diligent players who archived all of the events' cutscenes. Around this time, Lord Darigan launched a full-scale attack on Meridell, which became a massive war, the first of many wars between the two kingdoms. Both sides fought hard, with King Skarl and his knights, most notable of all, the knight Jaren, facing off against hordes of monsters. What many didn't know at the time was that the monsters they were fighting were actually Darigan Citadel's people, who were mutated by the curse that hit their land after their orb was stolen, and really couldn't help themselves. During the events of this plot, players were able to help fight in the war by choosing either Meridell or Darigan and fighting enemy creatures in the Battle Dome for points. They were awarded trophies depending on how many points they got and could win weapons and gear from the two factions. At the same time, a group of 4 kids were magically transported back in time to Meridell, where they helped their forces in the fight. These children are important to both kingdoms' histories, so we'll briefly go over each of them now. First, there's Lisha, the leader of the group. Is a yellow Aisha who is known for being clever and a quick thinker. Years ago, her older brother mysteriously disappeared. She was on a quest to find him. Then there's Kayla, a red Zafara, who grew up dreaming that she'd become just like the famous potion maker Kalvara. When she and her friends traveled through time to Meridell, she got her wish and used her potions to help fight the Darigan forces. Then there's Morris, a green Quiggle, who was a little warrior who dreamt of being just like Sir Jaren. He always was wearing his little Lupe ear headband, a sock tail, and carrying his trusty wooden sword. Though not much is known about him compared to his friends, he still plays an important role in the first war between Meridell and the Darigan Citadel. Lastly, Boris, a blue bloomaroo who wants to be a vampire just like the famous Count Von Rue. Like his friends, he dreamt of being a hero, and being sent back in time to Meridell gave him just the chance to do that. We also need to formally introduce another important player in the history of both kingdoms, Sir Jaren the Knight. Jaren is a blue Lupe and is one of the most well-known and recognizable figures in Meridell and maybe even all of Neopia's histories. During the wars against Darigan, he was known for his command of the Meridell army and bravery in battle. Since then, his face has been plastered just about everywhere, including stuffed toys, pillows, stamps, and even real-world action figures. But Jaren wasn't born in Meridell. A few years before the Champions Meridell plot, he accidentally fell through time, ending up in King Skarl's castle, just like Lisha and her friends did years later. That's because, as some of you may have already guessed, he is Lisha's older brother. Now that we know who some of the important figures are, let's go back to what happened. With Lisha and her friends on their side, Meridell took on the forces of the Darigan army, but they ultimately lost. The magic orb was taken back, and Meridell Castle was held under siege. With the magic orb back in his possession, it seemed like the war was over. Lord Darigan got what he wanted, and with the orb's magic, his land and people go back to normal, right? Well, things didn't quite work out that way. Even with the orb, Darigan Citadel and its people were still monstrous and withered, and that made Lord Darigan pretty upset. After all the bloodshed, nothing had changed, and everything was still, for lack of a better word, pretty bad. In a fit of anger, Lord Darigan used the power of the orb to destroy Meridell, sending out a big blast of energy that turned Meridell Castle to ruins. No doubt, he took some lives that day, including some of his own soldiers who were stationed at the captured enemy base. But he wasn't done. He absorbed the power of the orb, transforming into a fiery demon creature, and swore that he would take over both kingdoms for himself. Even to his trusted advisors, he had gone too far. Soon, some of Darigan's forces began to defect to the other side, and together they defeated Lord Darigan. He disappeared in a bright flash of light, and all that was left of him was the magic orb. After all the fighting, the orb broke in half, and the magic was gone forever. With nothing left to fight over, Meridell and the Darigan Citadel formed an uneasy truce, and for the time being, focused on picking up the pieces. Things were relatively peaceful between the two for a while, and during the time, a new leader stepped up to Darigan Citadel, a purple Yuri named Lord Cass. If you remember from the beginning of this lecture, he's the one whose stuffed likeness you bash with a stick in the game Cass Basher. During the First War, Cass was a general under Lord Darigan, and took up the throne after his master's disappearance. This next period of time is marked by the next major site-wide event, Battle for Meridell, which took place from February 2nd to May 13th of 2004. Once again, most of what we know about this period is from story cutscenes, which have been uploaded to YouTube by some dedicated players. During this time, it's said that the three ghosts that drove Lord Darigan to madness began to haunt Lord Cass, and convinced him that he needed to get revenge on Meridell. Cass convinced the people of Darigan Citadel that this war would be justified using political propaganda that painted King Skarl as an aggressor that was going to attack them at any minute. No doubt the people of Citadel had some unfinished business with the ones who stole their orb in the first place and cursed them and their land, and so armies began to mobilize and a plan was hatched. But before we get to that, let's move back over to Meridell, because something interesting was happening in the rural areas of the north. At around this time, a young farmer named Sally found a weird bat creature that was so hideous, the other farmers wanted to kill it. Sally saved the creature and named him Mr. Scary, hiding him in her parents' barn and feeding him to get his strength back. Although small, this simple act of kindness will become relevant later, as we continue the story of the second Darigan-Meridell conflict. With the Darigan forces prepared for battle, all Lord Cass had to do was give the signal, and war would begin again. But Cass wasn't like his old leader. He was a strategist. With his years of battle expertise, he sent in a secret operative known as the Court Dancer to sneak into Meridell Castle without suspicion. The beautiful Aisha, as we are told, was sent as a gift to King Skarl, an entertainer who would sing and dance for him and play music. Neopian historians say that her magic could subdue even the mightiest warrior, and she hypnotized everyone in the castle. At this moment, the Darigan army struck, and Meridell was quickly defeated. With half their forces under the Court Dancer's spell, Sir Jaren and his knights had no one to call for reinforcements, and you can imagine the carnage of such a battle. After that, Meridell was turned to ruins, only seen in museums and fragments of history. But that's not how it really played out, was it? How could Meridell be gone when it's still around today? The answer is simple. This version of history is the one that was told for ages before Lisha and her friends travel back in time. In their timeline, Meridell was defeated, and nothing remains but rubble and some ancient texts. When those four students went back to Meridell, they changed history, and here's how. In history as we know it, Lisha and her friends were in Meridell Castle when the Court Dancer cast her spell. All of them fell under it, except Lisha, who was a young mage in training. She fought the Court Dancer, revealing her true form, and freed everyone from the spell. King Skarl rallied his troops, and the Meridell army leapt into battle, with pets that were turned giant by Kayla's potions. Jaren and his forces rode flying unis up to the Citadel to take on Cass directly, but things didn't go as planned. Cass and Jaren fought one-on-one, but Jaren slipped and fell off the edge of the floating castle and seemingly died. Later, we learned that he was actually saved by an air fairy, who just so happened to be there at the time. Here's where it gets a bit strange. That bat thing that the farmer girl was nursing back to health? As it turns out, that was actually Lord Darigan, who somehow survived the end of the previous event. With his strength back, he took on Lord Cass and defeated him in combat. Cass fled to an inner chamber of the castle, where he was met by the three ghosts who made him start this war. It's said that in this moment, he felt guilt over what he'd done, but it was too late. The three spirits vaporized him on the spot. We're most likely never going to see him again. battle was over, and Meridell had been saved from ruin. Lord Darigan returned to the throne, and a truce was made that is still being honored today. Both Meridell and Darigan live in relative peace, at least for now. The two wars between them are some of Neopia's most famous conflicts, and are immortalized in the memories of players who were there, the characters, their stories, and countless commemorative in-game items. That, and a minigame where you whack a plushie of a war general as far as you can. Stepping back a bit, the history of Meridell and Darigan and the wars fought between them are some of Neopets' foundational texts, and over a decade later are still remembered by players. While many of the lands in Neopia just sort of exist, it's important to note how the team behind the game let players participate in the discovery of the lands, rather than just telling them what happened. Both Champions of Meridell and Battle for Meridell are an excellent example of interactive storytelling, at least for the time. Sure, it was mostly limited to single-player combat in the Battle Dome, but combined with the release of new chapters in the story and the hype that was drummed up, players were able to feel like they were part of Neopets' history. For players like me, who started years later, it's hard to understand the effect it's had on the game and its player base, but as I've mentioned already a few times, a lot of the events have been archived. Thanks to some really dedicated players, anyone can revisit the Meridell-Darigan wars themselves, though without the participation elements. And after over a decade, Neopets players continue to tell the stories of these two kingdoms for each new generation of players. To celebrate the 20th anniversary of the events, a special edition in the Neopian Times was released, with the help of over 50 players writing short stories and articles. These range from a celebration through stamp collecting, to debates about which kingdom is more livable, which talks about what everybody wants to know. What is Darigan Citadel's healthcare like? At the end of the day, these two kingdoms have rich histories that are so interconnected, it's hard to talk about one without the other. They're incredibly important to the overall lore of Neopia, and their histories continue to be referenced and discussed by those who play to this day. As recently as last year, both Meridell and Darigan's histories still remain in the general zeitgeist, with the release of new cards for the Battle Dome TCG that lets players take the role of either kingdom and control their forces. It's safe to say that this part of Neopia's history will not be forgotten anytime soon. With that, I'd like to end our lecture here. We went over a lot of material about two Neopian lands, which are quite important to the overall lore of Neopets. I hope that you took lots of notes, but don't worry, the test won't be for a while. Please remember to study up, and I hope to see you next time.
I finally got it.